Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. So we're just going to jump right into wrapping up some of the books that I've read recently. This does not at all encompass all of the books that I've read since my last update. Last year, I had this goal after looking at like my spreadsheet and tracking a little bit of my content and my reading. I realized that only about 40% of the books that I had read in 2022 actually made it to my channel. And so I don't want it to be where majority of what I read is for content, because I don't want, like, I just feel like that creates a negative connotation around reading. It becomes a chore. And also I feel like if I'm only reading for content, then I'm picking up certain types of books that usually don't bring me joy and usually are overhyped and I don't actually like. And so I didn't want it to be like overly fixed, but I did want to increase the amount of books that made it to reviews and content on my channel versus like what I read. So last year that number was about like 40%, and right now about 46 to 47% of what I read makes it to my channel in some capacity or form. And so like in a perfect world, I feel like it would be 50-50. Like half of the books I read would really just be for myself, for my own enjoyment, things that I share on Patreon, because a lot of the books and a lot of the reading that I do behind the scene actually shows up on my Patreon. And then like the other half would show up on my channel. So I feel like if my goal is 50-50, then I'm at like 46%. I'm really close to like having a good balance between being a content creator and a bookish reviewer, and then also just being a book lover and like loving to read books. So yeah, these are going to be all of the books worth note that I've read recently that I wanted to share on my channel, but not all of the books that I've read recently. So first we're going to kick it off with He Who Drowned the World. This is the sequel and the conclusion to the She Who Became the Sun duology. This is book 1 and this is book 2. So this book picks up a reasonable pace behind book 1. We're continuing to follow Chu Changba as they are on this journey to becoming a Chinese emperor, and I feel like this was a very worthy of note conclusion. It felt prolonged at times. It felt like it was being dragged out, especially towards the latter end, but I feel like by the ending I understood and appreciated what the author was doing here and ensuring that we're not just following Chu Changba's story, but like all the other tertiary and like secondary characters that we had throughout the entire duology. We got to see their conclusion and their end, and so there was a lot of just care handled with those characters. And so even though this is a story around Chu Changba, there's just so many other important people that we follow, and so it felt granted that all of the additional characters that we followed throughout the story got a worthy of note ending, and I appreciated that. I feel like overall together I would give the duology 3.5 stars. I feel like this is one where if I was to read it again upon second read, I would have much more appreciation for what the author has done and much more historical context. So like now that I can see the whole picture, I can appreciate the details. So the next one I'm going to talk about as a series of what I've read so far. When I did the video where Ashley from Bookish Realm recommended me a lot of mangas and graphic novels to try out, one of which was Blood on the Tracks, which captivated me, and I just could not read it. Like it was a compulsion to figure out what was going on in this series. So since that video, I have now read up to volume 12. So I'm currently on volume 12 of Blood on the Tracks, and I think it's going to complete around volume 20 or 21. As of right now, the series is actually wrapped up, and so we're currently just waiting on the translation and publication into the English language. So we are following a son and his deeply demented relationship with his mother and the mental illnesses that she suffers from and how that affects him, and a lot of the things and the ways in which she interacts with her son comes across as mental and emotional abuse and manipulation, and he starts to take on these deeply unsettling traits that he is getting from this model behavior of his mother. Every single volume ends on like a cliffhanger. This is very much a thriller like kind of horror manga series, but it is so unsettling because it is a character study. And so we don't get a lot of answers, especially in the beginning. We're watching this relationship unfold. We're watching this boy try to navigate the world, but also to appease his mother. And she feels very isolated from society. She feels isolated from her family, and she finds solace only with her son, and she wants his undying devotion and loyalty. And so he is torn between wanting to live a healthy life with healthy boundaries and relationships in school with other family members, but he also feels this deep connection and longing to be the center of his mother's world. And there's a lot of caveats that comes with that. And so each single volume has just captivated me and made me so deeply like involved and invested in like what's happening. We for a long time do not know actually what mental illness his mother actually has, but it starts to unfold and it starts to make more sense as you follow these different events, because there are quite a few tragedies that occur and scenes of violence. So I do want to give trigger warnings for that, but I am obsessed with blood on the tracks and I cannot like not think about it. This is also one that I got my husband to read with me, and so me and my husband ran through the first 10 to 12 volumes together because he was as obsessed and as invested as me, and he was like literally rushing me to read it. He was like, you need to pick up the next volume or I'm going to leave you behind, and that says a lot because my husband is much more of a gamer than a reader, and so this was the first like series, especially manga series, that he has sat down to read in years, and it was also the first one that I read, so it's super beginner friendly and I cannot rave about it enough without spoiling too much. And I'm literally holding off on reading the remaining volumes that are out because I want to wait until I have a break from school and work, and it's like the holiday season. I'm just sitting around at my house getting cozy with a blanket, and I'm going to run through the remaining volumes that are available to me. So the next one I read was actually a buddy read with Alana, and we read 3 Swedish Mountain Men together. This is by Lily Gold, and this is a why choose reverse harem relationship. This author has quite a few like novels, and so we seen the author and the covers were so cute and so fun, and I was like, Alana, please read these with me because I don't really want to read them by myself. The first reverse harem that I actually read was, what is it called? Lola and the Millionaires. And that was actually off the recommendation of Alana. So she reads quite a few reverse harems. And so she felt like the perfect person to buddy read this with me. And so I started a few days before her. And so the same night that she started, she finished. So she started late, but she actually finished the whole book before me. I felt so betrayed. So we're following Daisy, who was recently outed in her community. She is an art teacher at a school. And something happens that basically smears her entire reputation. She's going viral online. She is talked about in the news. She's getting a lot of hate speech and backlash from the administration and the parents, and she ends up losing her job. And so she feels this need to just run away and to escape because she's being rejected by people that she thought were her friends and family that she could depend on, and it turns out not to be true. So she goes off to Sweden, and her car actually ends up in a wreck, and so she gets stranded there, and 3 individuals that are local to the town actually let her stay with them while she's waiting on this blizzard snowstorm to pass, and also for her car to be repaired, but also because she really has nothing that she feels like it's worth returning to. There's a romance that kicks off between Daisy and the 3 literally Swedish mountain men. One of the characters in this book is actually Black, so it was super cool to see multiple diverse representation throughout the story. And I think that in terms of like a reverse harem, I really like this. I feel like she established a really good connection and just singular relationship between each of the 3 men, and then they also had a very healthy balance between sharing her and like you know, having this relationship all with the same person. I think it helps because these 3 men have been having reverse harem relationships prior to meeting Daisy, and so even though this is new to her, she comes in fairly confident in like what she wants, comfortable in her sexuality, and then also with the experience of 3 individuals who have done this before and have been in these relationships before, so there's a lot of support for her, and I liked it. I think I gave this one 3.5. No, I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I still plan to read all of the other ones. I think the next up on the docket for me and Alana to buddy read is A Babysitter. Like, I'll put the cover here. I think that that's the next one that we're gonna pick up, but all of these covers are just so adorable, and like I just couldn't help myself. Then the next one I read was something that I was seeing all over Facebook because I am in some bookish groups there, just to see, you know, I want to get a feel for the community. I feel like when you're on YouTube versus Instagram versus TikTok versus Facebook, all of those like bookish communities are very different, and there's a lot of hype and just popularity around different types of books. And so I saw Butcher and Blackbird, which is a new release by an author on KU, and it just got really good reviews. So I was like, I'm gonna pick it up because, you know, I need something fun to read. So we are following Butcher and Blackbird. That is their kind of like code names because they are two serial killers, and they target other sadistic serial killers that are getting away with crimes. And so they target individuals that they feel like are deserving of some, you know, vigilante justice, if I will say. So Butcher actually comes up with this competition that they do every year between him and Blackbird, and it is to target one individual, and so they compete to see who can take out the mark first. And this starts a friends to lovers, like slow burn romance between the two of them, and I have to say that I ate it up. I did. I ate this the fuck up. The characters were giving. I enjoyed their connection. I'm a slow burn lover. I'm a friends to lover as well. So it was so cool to see two individuals, especially Blackbird, who doesn't have really any family in her life. She really only has one friend. She's a bit flighty and she can be a bit skittish. So her name actually kind of fits with like her personality. And so when Butcher meets her, he knows this about her and he's like, I want her. I'm already in love with her. Like, we're already gonna be together, but I know that like I need to take this kind of like slow. And so he starts off with like a fun, enticing competition that he knows like she's gonna have a hard time resisting. So you get to see their development of the relationship over the course of years, and they're put in situations where they are both dependent upon the other to save them. And there's a situation at the end where I feel like the stakes were rather high, and it really shows like how far they've grown, how much they've come to like trust each other. And I think my favorite part, or like my favorite thing about this book, is that they know each other deeply in terms of like this hobby that they do that they can't tell anyone, but they still have real everyday lives around the world to upkeep like this natural like performance. And so when they try to merge their real day-to-day lives with the darkest like secrets that they know they have, they face so many like ordinary challenges that is really hard and weird for them to navigate, because it's like, I know him and I know his like character and I know what drives him, but seeing him every day as like a chef at work is like super weird. And like, how do I incorporate my life, my actual life with his, even though we've had this connection between something that we kind of do behind closed doors. So I thought that this was very well done. This is actually going to be a series, and so I am patiently awaiting book 2 because we're following the Butcher's brother, and he seems like a very interesting character. So I can't wait to see what happens in his book, but I am committed to reading. I think there's going to be 3 books in this series so far. I am committed to reading all 3. If you're interested, highly recommend you pick up Butcher and Blackbird. So next up is Revive Me Part 2. This is following Chris and Mallory. So this series is set up just a bit weird. We have, what is it? Is it Release Me? What is book 1 called? Give me 1 second. So book 1 is Restore Me, where we're following Dominic and Sloan. And so in book 2, when we have Revive Me, we're following Chris and Mallory, who have a connection to the characters that we're following in book 1. But they have 3 different episodes to their story. So book 1 is when they meet and fall in love in college, and you see something that happens that is against their like wishes, that kind of pulls them apart. And so they become separated after college and they go on to live different lives. And so in part 2 of Revive Me, we see them come back together after the death of Mallory's brother, and Chris feels like she really needs someone in her corner to support her because she is such a strong individual and she wants to show up for everyone else around her, so much so that he knows she will neglect herself. But this is a short kind of like fling that they have between each other, and it also ends with them separating as well. And then we have Revive Me Part 3, which is the final saga of the Chris and Mallory like romance story where they actually come back together. But I really enjoy what the author did here, because there was just so much history between what happened to them in college versus what happened like between them when they had like the fling and they tried to restart their relationship, but they're coming together as different individuals. They've grown up, they've learned to cope with the heartache and the separation of one another, but you also still see that there's some barriers in their relationship in part 2. I haven't read part 3 yet, but I do know that that is where they're going to finally resolve this. But I am appreciative of knowing the nuances and the depth of their connection, and how transformative it has been. I feel like this one I enjoyed so much more than part 1, because they're younger, you know, they can be a bit petty when it comes down to like college relationships, and they're having a bit of a fake relationship in part 1, and so in part 2 they're having a more honest and transparent connection, but it's happening in secret because everybody still thinks that they're broken up and they're separated. So they're having this connection with one another behind closed doors, and Mallory is deeply grieving the loss of her brother. And so in book 1, so in the first book where we're following Dominic and Sloane is grieving the loss of her husband, and I think that J.L. Seegers does grief really well. I think that it's tangible, it's realistic, and I really understand how these characters are dealing with their grief and how it affects their decision making, and how sometimes they can be illogical around it, and what type of like completion and healing that they're looking for. I saw that deeply in book 1, and I saw that deeply in part 2 of Chris and Mallory's story, and so I will continue to read from her. I do think that she is rather long-winded as an author. I know she's indie, but I would love for her books to be edited down just a smidge more. I just feel like we have way too many like cutscenes that make it to the final product, and I've also like just been preparing myself because I heard that continues on in book 3. I do see the evolution of her writing. I felt like book 1, when I read Dominic and Sloane's story, was just so sex heavy, and there is smut in all of these books, but the author is attempting to tell a forever like happily ever after story, and they're dealing with real life situations, and so I felt like we need time to see them flesh those things out, and it can't just be done through a sexual connection between each other. So I do think that she's resolved that in Chris and Mallory's story, and so I will let you guys know what I think of book 3 when I actually finish. I don't know if there's going to be any more books in the New Haven series because we have seen the central characters of this story kind of fall in love. It feels rather isolated and complete. So I don't know. I need to look on Goodreads to see. I know that the author's going to put out more books, of course, but I don't know if there's going to be any more books in this series particularly. Then I read Divine Rivals, and this was so unexpected how much I freaking love this book. Like, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I cannot wait to like really rave about it, but I knew that I was gonna love Rebecca Ross's writing, and something just took me so long to pick up her book because I was supposed to read A River Enchanted when it came out like 2 years ago, and it's literally just been sitting on my shelf, and so I had to read this for my Patreon pick of the month, and I was floored and just taken away by how much I love this book. So we're following Iris and Roman. The setting of this gives really World War I, but instead of fighting between countries, there's actually 2 warring gods that have been resting in the Earth's core for thousands of years, and now they're back and they are rekindling this epic battle between one another that humans thought was really over. And so there is this calling of devout believers in different gods to fight for them or fight on their behalf. And so we have a lot of men just signing up for the war to go off, and their families deeply concerned about them. They don't know what's happening with them. And so that is the story of Iris's brother. He feels the need to go and fight for one of the goddesses in this war, and so he takes off and leaves Iris and her mother behind, and they both have a really hard time coping with his absence. And so Iris decides to drop out of school and work for the Gazette as a journalist, but there's only one like a columnist position available. And so she has this competition with Roman, who is also a very good writer at the Gazette. And so they're competing for the same position. Iris's grandmother, who is no longer with her, left behind a typewriter. And so she decides to type letters to her brother because she hasn't heard from him since he left for the war. And so these letters go responded to. And he reads her letters, but he doesn't respond until one day he actually sends a letter back, letting her know that this is not like who you think it is. I am not your brother. And so they have this correspondence between each other where they start to share a lot of their deepest, darkest insecurities and secrets. And one day Iris is just faced with this ultimatum where she decides to go and report on the front lines of the war because, one, she wants the truth. She feels like news columnists are not being honest, and because no one is bold enough to go and actually see the horrors of war face to face. And also she still hasn't heard from her brother, and so she's deeply worried about him. So she goes to the front line, and Roman is kind of left behind to grapple with that decision, as well as he has some pressures from his family as well. So I really enjoyed this. I think my one caveat, complaint, would be that it has a bit of purity culture in it, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because we are in this quasi World War I 1915 1920s era, which purity culture is a real thing. But I do think that it was done just a tad bit heavy-handed within this story. But I can name so many other paranormal and fantasy romances that also have purity culture, so You win and you lose, right? And then I read from start to finish The Promised Neverland. This is a new favorite. Like, this is an all-time favorite. Every single like manga that I've picked up since, I've been hoping to fill the void that The Promised Neverland has left behind. So it's actually funny because I was in Barnes and Nobles and I seen this like kind of like on this table, and I was like drawn to the cover. I was like, I really want to know what this is about, but I've never really read mangas before. And so looking at this and wanting to buy it but not trusting myself is actually how I got the entire idea to have my friends recommend me mangas and graphic novels to start with. And so once I completed that video, I was like, you know what? Like, I want to read The Promised Neverland. There's just something about this cover that makes me feel like it's going to be happy and wholesome and just so cute, following orphans who are a family. And that is absolutely not what this is about. I picked up volume 1 expecting some Witch Hat Atelier vibes, some, you know, some really like found family vibes, and it was dark. It was dark. My jaw was on the floor and I did not know what to do with myself, but I needed to keep reading. So there was like, I want to say a week and a half to 2 weeks of my life where I was knocking these out like 2 to 3 volumes a day, and like it was life. I woke up, read a volume. I did whatever I needed to do for that day. And when it was time for me to go back to bed, I read another volume. If there was time to fit in another volume in between what I was doing, like I was consuming and like popcorn eating each one of the volumes in this book. So we have in The Promised Neverland 3 central characters, Emma, Ray, and Norman. They are 3 of the highest intellectual orphans at this orphanage home. And so they are raised by the mother. They're never allowed to go to the outside world, but they are happy and very well cared for. So one day, one of their younger siblings is told that she is going to be adopted into a family, and she leaves behind her favorite bear. And so Emma and Norman are like, we want to return this bear to her before she leaves. And so they go to this area that they're not supposed to, which is essentially the gate of the orphanage home, to give her this bear before she goes off with her new family, only to find that monsters have devoured her. And so now they make this connection between this is an orphanage, but not really an orphanage. This is a harvest farm, and we are humans being harvested for the consumption of monsters who are now in control of the world. And so these kids have to plan an escape, and Emma is so optimistic, and she's like, I don't want any more of my siblings to die. And so they have so much pressure to compose a plan to not only escape the orphanage, but they want to do so with all of their siblings, even the younger ones. So there's quite a few kids in this orphanage. They have to figure out how to survive in the real world because they've gotten some clues that lets them know that the world is inhabited and controlled by monsters. So they don't even know if humans are still alive. They don't know what they're going to do when they get out. So the stakes are just high and high and high because escaping the orphanage is the first major hurdle to survival. And it is dark. There is some graphically violent scenes, especially involving children. But when I say that this has my heart, like, I will forever and always harp about, rave, recommend The Promised Neverland, because like I really never thought that I could feel the way I feel about 3 fictional characters. But when I say like I have their back, like I just wanted to reach into that book and like hug them and like shed tears with them and tell them how like proud I fucking was of them. Like everything about this was perfect, and I'm really sad that the TV show was not successful. It like basically a Game of Thrones situation happened with the TV show, and that really hurts me because like I will never be able to read this for the first time again. Like I would sell a kidney to be able to read The Promised Neverland for the first time again, and I won't be able to do that. So I'll always just have this like nostalgic feeling for the first manga series that I fell head over heels for. Okay, my camera battery is dying, so I'm gonna swap it out and I'll be right back. So I am back with a fresh battery, so let's just pick up where we left off. The next series that I read and finished was the Mindf series, and so this is a set of 5 novellas by S.T. Abbey, and we are following an FBI agent who falls in love with a serial killer. This is also a revenge serial killer story because Lana is subjected to some very dark and disturbing experiences that is covered up by the conspiracy and the involvement of the legal system and the entire town, and she actually loses her family in the most part. So she is back with a vengeance, and Logan is actually the FBI agent that is on her trail and investigating her murders. And this kind of ends in I don't know if you guys have seen Money Heist, which is a very popular like TV show on Netflix, but there's also a romance between one of the robbers, one of the heistmen, actually the mastermind behind the heist, and the lead FBI agent that is supposed to be bringing this heist to an end. And you get to see the development of the relationship and how the employer of law enforcement is forced to grapple with the injustices and how corruption can seep into an entity that is supposed to be for good, and how sometimes you have to take, or sometimes people feel like you have to take the law into your own hands to mete out justice. And so this was very similar to me in that relationship, except it's on the reverse, where Lana, which is the female, is actually the criminal in this case. And I felt like it was solid. Like, I would love to have been able to read more from this author, but I recently found out that they have passed away. So I do think that like this is worth picking up because it is like addictive, and they're so short, and you're like gonna want to keep reading because they end on like very big revelations to like the relationship in the story. And then I got back in like my memoir bag, and so I read 2 memoirs recently. The first of which is Thicker Than Water. This is a memoir by Kerry Washington. I did not love this book, only because I feel like if you have been a fan of Kerry Washington and you follow her career in her life, she is a very reclusive and private celebrity. She got married in secret. She dated her husband in secret. And her kids for a long time were not known to the world. A lot of people still don't even know that Kerry Washington is married to an ex-pro football player, and that she does have 2 kids because she is very intentional around like how much information about herself is shared to the public. And so this book, I feel like, has some of the same makings of that, where she wants to share how a deep secret that was withheld from her by her parents has affected her life. And so the book feels a bit staccato because it's told in like episodic moments where this lie has affected her, even though she doesn't know, and she doesn't know why or what's going on, but it is taking a turn on her ability to have healthy relationships with other individuals. This is not a tell-all to Kerry's life. We don't really get to see her relationship with her husband. She mentions him and she mentions like their marriage, but we don't get any details around them. She also mentions her kids, but we don't get much around them either. This is really about very important like roles that she's performed in her life in terms of her career, as well as finding out that her parents were suffering from infertility issues, and so they decide to do an insemination process to help her mother be able to fertilize her egg. And so she is conceived through a donor sperm, and this sets off like a domino effect because her parents have a lot of like, I would say, shame and embarrassment around the fact that they were not able to conceive. And so they don't tell anybody. So much so that they don't even discuss it with themselves. And they eventually start to deny this one truth around the foundation of their family, that Kerry does not biologically belong to her father and the man that is raising her. And also, it's not just this secret. There's other instances where one of her parents is actually diagnosed with cancer a good 2 or 3 times before they actually tell her. Or there is an IRS tax evasion investigation where one of her parents is looking at serious jail time and they don't tell her for years. And so she starts to have this like perception that her parents, out of her own good, don't trust her ability to handle certain information, and so they can't be transparent with her. And so because that is modeled behavior, she starts to mimic it, and she starts to withhold information from her parents and from other people because she doesn't feel like she can trust them with the information, and she feels like she is doing it for their own good. And so it's just a really great example of kids pick up on so much more than you like give them credit for, and kids mimic what is modeled. They do what you do and not what you say. And so because she could never really feel connected to her parents because there was like this biological difference between them, like her and her father were just so very different, and she just really could not get to a place where she felt like she could appease them and she could be the perfect daughter, but also because they're keeping this secret from her as well. And so the more that she asks questions and inquires about things, the more like reclusive and like stoic they become. And so it's a combination of her not feeling connected to them for biological reasons, but also because she knows that they are withholding information from her. And so it's a story about how that impacts her life. It's a very short book. I listened to her narrate the audiobook and it was like 6 hours long. So that should let you know right there that she is not putting everything about her life into this story. And then I also read Jada's memoir, Worthy. I am on the side that it is deeply misogynistic to hate Jada the way that the world does. I feel like she gets unfair treatment for trying to navigate really hard situations that I can reckon with and I can reason with as a Black woman myself, as a mother myself, and as someone who is also married to a Black man whose career is supposed to take priority. It's not the same because I am a military spouse, but there is a culture within the United States military that the soldier, which is more often than not the male in the relationship, is the priority, and that everything you should do and everything that is expected of you should be in support of their prosperity in their career. And you are expected to be seen as devoted and to consistently put things that you want for your life on hold because they are doing this very important thing, whatever career that may be. I have also read Will's book, so I feel like I have much more context around their relationship and their marriage than the average person that is on the internet. So it was really nice to see Jada speak about things that were mentioned in Will's book and things that have been going viral online from her own words. And I feel like I learned so much about her that gave me more context and helped me understand her much more. From what I gather, she was in this cycle of always putting her family first and always sacrificing, which is something that we do as mothers all the time. The health and wellness and the success of our husband and our kids, a lot of times when our success is put up against theirs, we will always choose to sacrifice for the success of our family. And Jada is someone who has done that repeatedly. Will has also said this within his his autobiography, where his first relationship, his first marriage with Cherie, she had a lot of boundaries that she would not compromise on. She had this view of a life that she wanted to live, and she was going to bat and advocating for herself for that type of life. And it was in contrast to what Will wanted. He wanted someone that was much more bendable in what they wanted their life to look like. And so I feel like that contributes to why his marriage with Jada is so successful, because she was, in a lot of ways, if I look at the way he described his relationship with his first wife to Jada, she was more bendable. She was more willing to compromise, and those compromises happened so much that they turned into sacrifices, and those sacrifices turned into a loss of Jada. One thing that is mentioned in her book that is slightly glazed over is the fact that Jada was diagnosed with complex PTSD. I have personal connections with people who have complex PTSD, and I've read memoirs, and one of my favorite memoirs ever was What My Bones Know, is a memoir about life with complex PTSD, and I understand how that warps your perception of the world and the worthiness of yourself, and I can see how that comes to play a part in their relationship and in Jada's life, because it is really, really hard to live with complex PTSD. And for those of you who are watching this and may not know what that is, if you are experiencing one traumatic event, such as 9/11, for example, it can take years of therapy to find a new semblance of normal after one tragic thing happens to you. And maybe you will never get back to normal. And maybe that one tragic thing, such as a school shooting, will affect you for the rest of your life. Individuals with complex PTSD have often been exposed to 9/11 type events multiple times. And so if you can compare and rationalize in your mind how much self-healing and work needs to be done to someone who has just experienced one event, imagine the work that it takes to reconcile someone who has experienced multiple instances that makes their PTSD complex and compound in so many ways. Another thing that I feel like highlighted their relationship was in Will's book. He mentioned that they're in therapy, and the therapist asked them to write down the list, like write down things that are important to them by order of priority. And the first thing that Will wrote down is himself. The thing that is most important to him is himself. He needs to be happy and whole to be able to lead the family. And so he needs to prioritize himself. Jada put herself fourth on her list. It was him, it was the kids, it was some other things, and then fourth on her list was herself. And so as someone who has been married, and I've been married for 6 years, so nowhere near as long as they have, when you have someone, when you're in a relationship where the priorities are that different, where you have someone who is always sacrificing and always compromising because their priorities is their family and their spouse, and then you have a spouse whose priority is themselves, it becomes an unequal dynamic with one person taking and one person constantly giving. So another example in Will's book, and I'm going to stick on his for just a second before I get back to Jada's. Willow expresses that she no longer wants to be a music artist. She doesn't want to whip her hair back and forth anymore. And she expresses this to Will. And he is more of like, keep your eye on the ball. Emotions can be held, and we'll reconcile what damage. We'll assess the damage once we get to the finish line, right? Just keep going. And like, it doesn't matter what pieces are flying off of the car or the ship or the boat, as long as we make it there, and then we can fix whatever damage happened along the way. That is the perception that I get from Will. So when Willow expresses to him that like, hey, I don't want to do this, and he's telling her, well, you made all these promises and everybody's excited and they're supporting you, you need to do this, and she's like, but don't you care how I feel? And Will says, that's slow on the list. I care about whether or not you're healthy. I care about whether or not you're safe. I care about whether or not you have opportunities to be successful and to thrive. And then somewhere around fourth or fifth, I care about your feelings. This is important because Jada is a person who wants to feel good, right? She's not looking for success. She's not looking for lots of money and wealth and power. Jada is on this path of, I want to feel good about myself. And Will is not a person of feelings. He's a person of like logic, of like, I understand that you feel something, but like, right? Like there's goals, there's plans, there's things that need to be executed. And so there's a disconnect for a while between himself and his family because he is so goal oriented that self-assessment can come later. Self-balance, emotional and mental regulation, that can come later. Eye on the ball. And so I feel like that perspective and understanding that, like those two things about both of them, it really gave me a deeper understanding of like how and in what ways they constantly kind of missed each other. Because Jada at some point, I feel like she halted her healing for the sake of her family. Whenever she wanted to do something for herself that would make her happy, multiple times throughout her book, she puts it on pause or she stops it completely to support her husband and to support her kids. And so she gets to a place of being suicidal, being depressed, and wanting to not even try anymore. So then with that being said, one thing that has happened in the relationship that has gone viral, and Will and her have both talked about in their book, is that for her 40th birthday, he planned a party that he had been planning for 3 years. Will is an entertainer and he loves to impress. He loves to razzle and to dazzle. And so he was like throwing this party for her because he wanted it to be big and drastic, which is something that he would have wanted. But Jada at this time is depressed and has contemplated suicide, and has planned out her suicide. And so she's trying to find joy in life. She's trying to find happiness and appreciation for the things that are in her life. And so she wants a very private, intimate birthday with the individuals around her that she feels like supports her, loves her, and has her best interests. And so it is on this birthday that Will throws this extravagant event, and she feels like she has to rise to the occasion and fake happiness for the sake of what Will has done and all the people that he's brought out to celebrate her and her birthday. And I resonated with how exhausting it is to have to put on a happy, smiling face when you don't feel like it, let alone when you are suicidal. So it's just so much more like conversations to be had around mental health and how we balance it, and how it is important to love people how they want to be loved and not how you want to be loved. And I speak from my own personal experience. everyone's love language is different. And so if your love language is gift giving, and that's how you receive love, you make the mistake of assuming that everybody wants to receive love the way that you do. And so you become a gift giver to other people, and you get upset when they don't have that appreciation, and that happiness, and like they're not all head over heels and like thank you for it, because that may not be how they receive love, right? They might be acts of service, acts of kindness may go a longer way than whatever gift you just bought for them. So I stand on the side of not absolutely hating Jada. I understand and I get it. And it sucks to want to find yourself and want to discover who you are and what makes you actually happy on a world stage. Now, did she contribute to this? Absolutely. I think that she does. I think that, and she mentions in her book that on her journey to healing, she reads a lot of like Buddhist spiritual healing books. She meets with a lot of gurus and a lot of monks. She does a lot of traveling, and she starts to see some success in healing in her life, and that gives her a false conception that she is further along than what she is. She thinks that she is working towards a place of completion, and it takes her a really long time to recognize that her healing journey is lifelong, especially someone with complex PTSD. You will spend the rest of your life trying to work towards balance and healing, and that is something that needs to be grappled with and understood and accepted. And so she starts to share knowledge with the world because she has this mindset that she can help people and get them on a better path the same way that these techniques or whatever has helped her, without realizing that, yes, you took 2 steps forward on a marathon. Right? This is going to go on forever. You're never going to get to a point where like you're done. There's no, this is not a check mark, right? Like you're not going to finish the race and then be done. Like this is a lifelong marathon. And so with that perception, she starts to share things that she thinks is going to help people heal, but it really comes across as oversharing. And I get people's frustration with knowing too much information about their relationship and their life. I get it. Some things they probably should have kept to themselves. But also I feel like when you are a celebrity, in this day and age of social media, what is to yourself? Because even when people, going back to Kerry Washington, even when people try to withhold information and to have some semblance of privacy in their life, tabloids and paparazzi exploits them, right? Kerry Washington mentions in her own book that her marriage certificate is actually found out by the tabloids, and so her entire marriage is blasted. Even though she went through so much trouble to keep it a secret, it is blasted because they go through the court systems and they find what is deemed public information, and so she is ousted. Kids photos of her children are leaked. So it's like, can you really have some sense of privacy? Like, even if Jada had not shared this information and Will had not shared this information, because they both have overshared, would it have still been a secret? I doubt it, because today people are always looking to expose celebrities, especially when they try to keep things a secret. So those are some of my thoughts around the books that I've read so far. Thank you guys for watching my video, and I will see you in the next one.